Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television. That's channel 26.1, Sunday morning at 8:30, repeated again at 4:30, although now we have some extra broadcast times on Sunday and also on Saturday. You can find those at my site, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. You'll also find show notes for this episode and other episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, plus all the other content that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. Today's guest is Richard Ranzau. He's a member of the Sedgwick County Commission representing District 4, which is downtown Wichita, north and northwest Wichita, and the cities of Valley Center and Park City. Before his election in 2010, Commissioner Ranzau was a physician's assistant working in orthopedic surgery. He's retired from the Army Reserves and is a veteran of the Persian Gulf and Iraq wars. So, Richard Ranzau, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. Our co-host, Karl Peterjohn, I think you know each other from your joint service on the Sedgwick County Commission. So, Richard, this week at the Sedgwick County Commission, you were moved by your convictions, I guess I should say, to talk about one of your colleagues, Commissioner Michael O'Donnell. And I think the nut of what you said was this sentence: while I have no knowledge or evidence of any unlawful activities, there has been, in my opinion, a consistent, prolonged, and almost daily effort by one of my colleagues to use his position to help his friends, campaign contributors, and ultimately himself. So why'd you do that, Richard? What was the motivation behind this?
Well, I just think over the last 10 months, I've seen a pattern behavior that I think is improper. Mm-hmm. I got involved in politics because I was frustrated with how politicians would spend our dollars and often use our tax dollars to further their own political careers. You especially hear about this in Washington, D.C., and I was shocked to experience what I've experienced over the last 10 months. And so I tried to deal with the situation privately. We have been able to stop most everything from actually going forward. But then I did have a private and very direct conversation with Commissioner O'Donnell in an attempt to say, listen, this is just not appropriate. Many of the things that he's doing with respect to trying to make deals individually really should be done by staff. They're supposed to go out and help find us solutions for whatever problem it is, and let everybody out in the community, have an opportunity to bid on those sorts of things or give us proposals. And instead, he was doing these things on his own and with friends that he knew, and it was just beyond anything I've ever experienced as an elected official. And I felt like I needed to do something, and I asked him to stop. He looked me directly in the face and said, no, it's not going to stop.
In the last 10 months, so just as a timeline here, Commissioner O'Donnell was elected last November and would have started taking office in January of this year, just about 10 months ago, I think it would have been.
That's correct.
And he is chair pro tem, or pro tempore, whatever you call it, of the county commission. What does that mean?
Well, he's basically the assistant chairman, so he helps run the meetings when the chairman's not there. But another important part of that is whenever there's meetings with the city or other organizations, or he and the chairman attend those meetings on our behalf. So he's aware of things that are going on, maybe that other commissioners don't, and certainly before other commissioners know about them. That just kind of comes with the territory. And so he often has some of that inside information.
So the chairman of the commission, which is Dave Unruh right now, he is selected by the other commission members. So he's not really kind of like the mayor, but he is kind of like the mayor because he runs the meetings, he signs the documents. If someone requests the head of the county commission to come and speak at a ribbon cutting or something, it'd probably be him. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Or perhaps Michael O'Donnell if Chairman Unruh was not available.
That's right, yes.
Okay. And it's not like Michael O'Donnell is a novice. He served a 4-year term in the Kansas Senate, and before that he served, I think, about 2 years on the Wichita City Council before he ran for the Senate.
That's right. And I actually have supported him in the past when he ran for Senate and actually when he ran for commissioner.
And I think all of it. I mean, I think all of us consider Michael a friend and definitely a politician, I would say. But he, when he was on the Wichita City Council, definitely had a free market streak, very wide, and he helped me develop some arguments and so forth. And but that seems to have changed a little bit from his positions now on the county commission, voting for TIF districts and things like that.
Well, that's another issue. I mean, early in this year, we had an issue with respect to the health department and some vaccines, and he voted with the majority in a way that I think was contrary to free market and conservative principles. And he told me afterwards, he said, on the issue itself, I would probably agree with you, but I need to vote with Chairman Unruh because I think in my next election he can help me raise more money. I've found that very disappointing, but that exemplifies what's going on. I think I've come to realize that every decision he makes, he sees now through a political lens and a way to gain advantage at some point in the future.
Yeah. Well, Richard, let's take a moment off. I see that Karl, I think, has a question, but we'll get to Karl's question right after we come back from this commercial break. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, co-host Karl Peterjohn, our guest Richard Ranzau of the Sedgwick County Commission. Karl, you had a question.
Yeah, I certainly did, but first, Bob, I think I need to just clear the air because I was a colleague of Richard, served 8 years on the county commission, and also supported Michael O'Donnell when he ran for office previously. Richard, the county commission, as I well know, and you well know, elects new leadership every first meeting of every calendar year in January. We're doing this in November. Why'd you bring it up now when this all you're going to be electing new leadership in less than 2 months anyway?
Well, that's a good question. There's been a long series of events that actually culminated probably a little over 4 weeks ago when I heard about an idea that Commissioner O'Donnell had that was to have a $50,000 slush fund for each commissioner to spend at their will without getting any approval process. So you can kind of use it to give it to whatever you wanted it, and I think to kind of grease the skids and help your friends out. But so that really, I'd had enough, and something needed to be done. But first I felt like I needed to have a personal conversation with him in private to try to get it stopped, and I did that. The problem is something intervened at that point that did not allow me to do this 4 weeks ago as far as becoming public, and unfortunately I can't really talk about it publicly at this point. So I had to wait about 4 weeks, and this was the soonest that I could do it, which I did because I just felt like you get 2 more months and I needed to say something. I needed to bring it out publicly. I needed to try to make a change, and I just didn't think this was so important. I didn't think we should have waited another 2 months.
Well, Richard, let me ask you, because you've brought up the idea, instead of having a commission contingency fund, which I think was a little bit over $300,000 for this fiscal year, if my memory's right, and instead of switching it over to give each commissioner $50,000 or maybe $60,000 each, instead of that, where they can spend it as each commissioner sees fit, is this something that's going to show up on a commission agenda soon?
I don't think so. I think maybe that's been stopped. I think the rest of the commissioners kind of realized that really wasn't a good idea, and I don't think it's going to go forward. But it's a disturbing mindset that could even come up, in particular when you put it in the context with everything else that's going on.
Was this discussed in any staff meeting or any other public meetings?
No.
The commission has
No, it
held?
was just a suggestion. I was informed about this idea by staff, and it followed a long series of events, and at that point I said enough is enough.
So this was just sort of the final nail, so to speak.
Right, and at that point I informed staff that I wasn't going to support anything that was initiated by Commissioner O'Donnell. I made the decision to talk to him privately, and then had to wait for a few weeks before I could publicly bring that out. And at some point there will be more information coming out, become more public. I think people will realize I made the right decision, and I'm really shocked and disappointed that my colleagues didn't support my motion.
Okay, well, There are other things happening at the commission too, I think. For example, you're working on your legislative platform. So this is where the Sedgwick County Commission comes to a consensus as to what they'd like to see the state legislature do. That session starting in January in just a couple months. You have a platform or plank or whatever that the county would like to see the state continue on with its use of economic development tools. Economic development incentives are handled, some are at the state level, some are at the local level, typically started by the city rather than the county, but there may be an opportunity for you a little bit. But here's the backdrop. In 2016, for the year, the Wichita economy shrank. It shrank 1.4% in real terms. The average metropolitan area grew by 1.7%. So there's a 3.1% gap between the performance of the Wichita MSA, which is bigger than Sedgwick County. And since 2001, all MSAs grew by 29.3%, while Wichita only 12.3%. That's less than half the rate. And since the recession ended in 2010, Wichita's falling further behind. So what are we going to do, Richard, to help crank up some economic development in Wichita?
Well, that's a good question, and obviously it's a very complicated issue. Some politicians will make you think that with just a few things here and there, they can make miracles happen. With incentives or corporate welfare, they can make that happen. Obviously, you can't. I think that since 70% of our jobs come from small businesses, and the top two factors that affect businesses are taxes and regulation, we should address those areas. Unfortunately, many of the organizations in our community that are involved in economic development haven't been interested in doing that. In fact, I think a few years ago we actually made some difficult decisions in the county to control spending, which will ultimately lead to a mill levy reduction here in a few years, and I think Karl was involved in that. They actually got involved in the quick to cuts type of atmosphere that was going on, and the disappointing thing was they didn't even take the time to come in and talk to us to understand what it was we were doing. We were increasing efficiency of government and eliminating things that we didn't need to spend money on, but they didn't even take the time to come and ask.
And I think last year I looked up, there was this reduction in the health department spending, but I looked at the services actually performed in terms of immunizations, and immunizations were up in all categories, except for one, I think, which was a very slight change. So the budget was cut, but they were still providing like the same level of service as much as was needed, it seemed like. Richard, we are going to take another commercial break here, and when we come back, let's continue talking about economic development in Sedgwick County. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, co-host Karl Peterjohn. Our guest this week is Sedgwick County Commissioner Richard Ranzau. So we were talking about economic development and what we need to do to see if we can catch up. By the way, I should say that a lot of our civic leaders, I would say elected officials, plus also officials at the Chamber of Commerce, the Wichita Chamber that is, the Greater Wichita Partnership, they point to a declining unemployment rate in Wichita. And it's true. Since about 7 or 8 years ago, our unemployment is half the rate that it was then. But it's almost all due to a shrinking labor force. The unemployment rate is a ratio between the number of people working and those who want to work. There's a slight uptick in the number of people working, a big decrease in the labor force. That leads to a declining unemployment rate, but it's really not good news.
Right, I think it gives us a false sense of security, and I think it's important to address the real numbers.
Richard, let me ask you a question, because one of the key things, every February you all get a presentation from the appraiser in terms of changes in valuation, but the final pieces don't come in until the state assessed property and the tax appeal numbers come up, are provided, and they normally show up in November. How does the assessed value growth for all property tax classes look this year compared to where we were last year?
Well, we've actually, I'm sorry I didn't come with the exact number, but we've actually had some good growth as far as property tax values at the county, and especially out in the unincorporated area in the fire district. But it's starting to go up a little bit, which has helped us with, at least at the county, our budget issues in addition to the fact that we've controlled spending.
And I think we see stories that the real estate market is heating up, which means prices are rising, and that
Right.
leads to more property tax revenue. Of course, the other way revenue goes up is new property being created as new stuff is built. You know, I hate to harp on our local economic development officials, but one statewide economic development program that the commission is thinking, or at least recommending that is continued, is PEAK, Promoting Employment Across Kansas. This is a program where companies get to keep, essentially, the withholding taxes that their employees pay. Now, in Johnson County, which is our state's largest county, about maybe 10% bigger than Wichita, over the last 5 years, they've initiated 135 different projects with PEAK that produce $36 million a year in benefits. Sedgwick County, 8 projects versus 135, with annual benefits of $2 million versus $36 million in Johnson County. Now, I think some of us here don't necessarily think that these economic development incentives are needed, but Jeff Fleur, Dave Unruh, these people that have been running the county, the city, the economic development machinery, they think incentives are necessary, yet we're just not using them. They're not working for us here.
Right. I was shocked by those numbers when you told me about those. It's very lopsided. You kind of wonder what's going on there.
Yeah, and it's, like Johnson County's a little bit bigger, but it's not like their mix of business and everything is so different. We've got a lot of companies down here that might benefit from PEAK if we want to use those types of things.
Well, that's been one of the challenges, and it's going to be a bigger challenge since the state passed the biggest income tax increase in state history earlier this year, and there's a possibility of more tax increases in the future. There's a thought out there, Commissioner, that increasing taxes can be positive for economic development. Has that ever occurred in your experience?
No, it never has. I think my constituents would prefer to work more for themselves and less for the government.
And I think we need to challenge some of these people, and this is going to be an issue in the governor's campaign next year, I think, is if you ask Jim Ward or Karl Brewer, the Democrats, and some of the Republicans who want to raise taxes, how exactly is the mechanism where higher taxes will help us in economic growth?
Well, that's a good point. And going back to the tax increase that you talked about that we had, I suggested that we add to our legislative platform that we support a constitutional amendment that would require a voter approval for all tax increases at the state level and prohibit retroactive tax increases like we had here recently. Unfortunately, at this point, I don't think I have anyone else on the commission who wants to add that to our legislative agenda, but I'm going to keep working on that.
So I know, Karl, when you ran for the commission, that was one of your platforms and something you advocated, that if we want to increase taxes, and in the county that's mostly the property tax rate, although it could be sales tax rate, that there would have to be a vote by the people.
Well,
is that right?
that's been in the county's platform through this year. Whether it'll be there next year
It
is
sounds
to
like,
be
Richard,
determined.
you're saying maybe not.
Well, we've totally revamped it and shrunk down the legislative agenda, which I think is good. But as far as the key initiatives, instead of having what I've suggested, they actually now want to basically have a slush fund. What they call it, a closing fund. I call it a slush fund at the state level, and that's going to be coordinated between the partnership, the city, and the county. I just found out about that the day that we talked about the legislative agenda. So I was surprised and disappointed to see that on there, and I'll continue to fight against that.
And before we take our last break, it's important to know that a lot of this is handled by the Department of Commerce, the Secretary of Commerce in Topeka, and the most recent occupant of that office, we found out, was engaged in some serious self-dealing and really inappropriate type of activity. So let's take our last break for today. We'll be right back in just a moment. Well, welcome back to our last segment of Wichita Liberty TV for today. I'm Bob Weeks, co-host Karl Peterjohn, our guest, Sedgwick County Commissioner Richard Ranzau. So, Commissioner Ranzau, something that's going to be coming, well, it's already a big issue in Wichita, is the possibility of Tyson, a large diversified agricultural company, building a chicken processing plant in Sedgwick County, employing perhaps 1,600 people, an investment of $300 million, something like that. Some of the objections we see are, well, would you want this plant across the street from you? It smells, it uses our precious water, it pollutes. Wages are low and working conditions are bad. There's immigrant labor, both legal and illegal. How's the county going to make a decision? I know Tyson will probably want economic development incentives like industrial revenue bonds, which is property tax forgiveness basically. How's the county going to go about deciding whether this is good for Sedgwick County or not?
Well, right now we're in the information gathering phase. I think people need to understand that there is no proposal. Okay, there's actually 3 sites in Kansas that they're considering. They're going to decide which site they would like to come to, and then the partnership is really Greater Wichita Partnership is gathering on all the information. All commissioners are concerned about all the questions that have been brought up, and we say go out and get the facts, bring it back to us, see what the proposal is. I do know that I think this is going to be the first plant they've built in America in like over 20 years.
Quite a while.
I've been told that it'll have all the new bells and whistles to take care of water quality and all this stuff. And it's not the type of plant that cooks food, so there shouldn't be a smell with it. It's they butcher the chickens and just freeze them or not necessarily freeze them, but pack them up and then they go out.
Let me ask this question as a process question, because the city normally provides water and sewer services. They're talking to the county. They'd obviously have a significant water and sewer component. How would Sedgwick County handle that side of it, since they don't have the county doesn't have a sewer system?
Well, my understanding
or water.
My understanding is they're planning on invest about $80 million in a water system, and they would have the ability to pump the water out of the ground, process it, and put it back in really cleaner than what they got it. So there would be type of, from what I understand, there again, this is the very basics and just some things that I've heard. I haven't actually seen anything in writing that would basically be they could be reusing that water. So I think that's what they might be able to do. But that's a good question. As we get moved down the road, then we'll have to take a look at that.
And Tyson has to get these chickens from somewhere. I think they're talking like about 1.2 million chickens per year or something like that. So typically what they do is they contract with farmers in the nearby area. So some people are saying, well, do you want all these chicken houses in Sedgwick County and maybe Kingman County, wherever they're going to be? What's wrong with chicken houses?
Well, I don't know. I think they'd be out in the county, out in the unincorporated area. I think once they were built, you probably wouldn't even notice them because I think all the chickens are inside. I don't know, but there again, this is all speculation until we get information exactly what that would entail, what they would look like, the numbers and everything. I do know I talked to the head of the local farm bureau because I've heard some allegations that farmers, don't do well, don't want it, but at least here in Sedgwick County, they're telling me that they're supportive of this. That's just one piece of the pie, but there again, we got to gather all the information together.
So Tyson has to make an offer to a farmer who might be interested in it. Says, here's our contract, here's what we want to do, do you agree or not? And the farmer should be able to figure out for himself. I mean, we have a agriculture university in the state, we have the Farm Bureau, all these resources for farmers to rely upon. It doesn't seem like Tyson ought to be able to take advantage of farmers if they don't want to participate.
Well, that's what I would think. If they're not paying enough or it's not worth it, then the farmer simply wouldn't do it. But there again, I don't know the details. I've heard a lot of things on both sides, and I think that's why I think it's important to, to get all the facts. But then the second question is, if they are going to come here, should they receive incentives? And I've been opposed to those, and in the past. And in this case, I mean, you're going to have roads that need work. You're going to have police, fire, EMS. It'll be a significant, requirement.
Yeah.
And is it really
a lot of highway traffic? They're talking about the chicken trucks and everything, but it's commerce. I mean, we desperately need jobs. But I have a feeling, Richard, there's a large contingent in this town, I think they've already started speaking at Sedgwick County Commission meetings, that they would rather have people unemployed and dependent on government rather than working at a job.
Well, I certainly hope not. I haven't made a decision one way or the other because actually there's nothing to decide. I am open to it because, I remember when we had the Cudahy beef packing plant up in my district at 21st and Broadway. I have two grandparents that had retired from there. My parents had worked there at different times in their lives, and I remember when it closed, there were a lot of blue collar people who lost their jobs and had, made money and had good benefits. And that's another thing we need to find out. I'm told that these jobs offer benefits which would be significant for a lot of people.
Yeah, and what's interesting is not long ago that, I don't know if it's that same plant or successor plant in North Wichita expanded, and City Council member Janet Miller gave a speech at the ribbon cut or groundbreaking or whatever, and so if she's in favor of a bacon plant right in Wichita, how could she be opposed to a chicken plant out in the county somewhere? I don't know. I bet she's going to figure out a way. But Richard Ranzau, we're out of time for today. Thank you very much for appearing this week. Karl Peterjohn, thank you for your contributions. And thank you, the viewer, for watching today. We'll see you again next week.